All right, everybody, welcome. Nice comfy spot. We're going to get started here. I'm going to mute everybody. We'll unmute people coming up in just a little bit, and we are about to have an amazing experience here with Tom Furness and Chris Stapleton. If you haven't read the description, don't worry, we'll tell you all about it. This is a fireside chat, so this means that the conversation is open to you all as well, and so we'll be opening that up in just a few minutes as we start with this amazing conversation here. So the Virtual World Society has been around for how many years?
Well, originally in 93.
Okay, 1993.
But the most recently has been which one? Yeah. It's actually the latest one was in 2015, 16 time period.
3.0.
Okay.
3.0, right.
Yeah. 3.0.
Yeah.
And Tom Furness, y'all would not be here if it wasn't for this amazing man and also the work of Chris Stapleton to take this concept we now know as virtual reality and make it real, make it happen, test drive it, break it, push it to its limits, abuse the military contracts and arrangements that were, to make this happen. And so we are so honored to have him here with the Virtual World Society, which is a membership. So please take time to go to virtualworldsociety.org and please join. Join.
It's free.
Yes, and it is free. There you go. And educators, well, they can also take donations. So, so
yes, definitely.
Do more than leave a donation to Virtual World Society in your will. Do it while you're alive as well. And but do get involved and become a member. Educators in VR and Virtual World Society is a partner, and we are so thrilled to be a part of this. And so every other week, right now, this is, we host these fireside events with Virtual World Society, bringing you some of the greatest leaders and pioneers in VR, AR, and XR, who are not only did they literally invent the process and push it around and make it possible. They've written the books, they've done all the research, and we are so lucky to be here and be privileged. So Tom, it is all yours. Everybody give it on up! Some hearts and claps for Virtual World Society and for Tom and for Chris. Yay!
Thanks so much for that introduction. You're so sweet and wonderful. And thanks Daniel and Donna and Mark and all those and the VWS staff, all of these who have made this possible today. And I'm so excited today because we have with us today our co-founder of the Virtual World Society, Christopher Stapleton. Now, we're going to have an interesting interactive session, I hope, and we're going to talk about a really important topic. But let me first just introduce Chris. And not only is he a good-looking guy, he is what I call, he's made a concerto of contribution to our community. He's taken VR, AR, MR, XR into entertainment, education, medicine, a whole string of things. And so we're delighted to have Chris with us and spend this time. And we'll be sort of introducing a subject matter here in a few minutes. But Chris, okay, so tell us, just in a nutshell, about your career and what in the world was it that brought you into this whole concerto of contributions?
That's a good question. You can do the next slide. But this is a snapshot. I started for designing for stage and screen in New York City and working on Broadway and feature films, music videos. And that got me into immersive social story worlds. And that went into building mega theme parks around the world, and then I started a laboratory like 20 years ago for mixed reality, and that's when I met you, and I started getting into the academic world and the research world, and you've been such an inspiration so far, Tom, so it's really great that you're here inspiring so many other generations. And then I got into bringing the mixed reality into all the community centers, from hospitals to museums to schools, wherever it went. I wanted to see how far it could do, because I'm an experienced architect, so I like to expand the human experience, particularly the social experience, how we work together. And for the last 10 years, I've been a social entrepreneur to really kind of go where the problems are and really be able to go and see what problems I can solve, and embed my laboratories into the problem space of the world.
Well, Steve, I mean, when you were doing this, Chris, I know that you had a contribution that you made in the Universal um, with the theme park.
Right.
That's sort of different. Not too many people get a chance to design theme parks.
Well, my first mega theme park, they said this is a once in a lifetime experience. And I think I've had about 10 of them so far. But I've been very lucky to work for Disney and Universal and Sanrio and Sentosa and Nickelodeon and all these different entertainment companies to really go into building physically and virtually to the farthest extent. And I just came back from China working on a mixed reality thrill ride adventure film with the makers of some of the computer graphics from Star Wars effects company.
Yeah. This guy has a lot of fun. Yeah. So, Chris, now we've sort of together chosen this topic of isolation and loneliness, because this is certainly something that we are concerned about today with the pandemic and what it's doing to us in terms of having a separation from perhaps a community and our friends and loved ones that we would normally have. And so we've chosen this as a topic. Why don't you tell us why you and how you got interested in this whole area of isolation?
Right. Well, I didn't necessarily go for isolation. I was kind of helping this group with disability. One of our theme park crew had a stroke and got aphasia. And I started to say, well, how can I use what I do to help him and help all people with aphasia, which I'll explain later. And it's working with disabilities that I realized that that whole population of disabled people are worse off because they're isolated. Society isolates them.
Yeah.
And then I started discovering all these areas that we help with are isolated. They become invisible and marginalized by society, whether it's through prejudice or displacement or aging or hospitalization. I mean, the list goes on and on. There is everyone knows somebody affected by isolation, and if you don't, then you're not looking. And this became such a big issue because I couldn't do much for the disability or for a lot of things, but I really could help them with the isolation. And you realize that there are tens of millions of people affected by isolation, and it's costing society tens of billions of dollars.
Well, Chris, and also I understand from your recent work, you've been working with NASA about this whole issue of isolation in space. Of course, it's a different kind of isolation, certainly, but tell us what you've been doing in that area.
Well, it's not much different than the isolation I work with down Earth. And one of the consequences of not solving the isolation problem is that we will never get to Mars. Isolation is the only psychological barrier for human habitation on Mars. And the issue is that it's a growing epidemic on Earth. So how can we solve it in deep space if we can't solve it on Earth? And so that's really what I'm focusing on. And as I working with isolation with all these marginalized societies, I'm really understanding, well, what is behind the problem? And how can we build the technology and tools and development to really help predict and model, astronauts in deep space to start to recognize when they start to get isolation, or to monitor them or to recover that. Because by the time you recognize it's isolation, it's too late. We have to have prehabilitation for isolation. We need not to get there. And the way we get there is that society is really isolating these people who are different. And that is the number one cause. And because you're different, you speak different, you look different, you act different, you believe different things, society isolates you, and that's the downward spiral.
Wow, Chris. Well, maybe we can turn to the audience and ask if they have any comments or examples of where they've seen isolation, and in their loved ones and friends and others that may come from these different things that you mentioned, these different situations. So
All right.
let's open it up to
Yep.
the audience.
The audience
If you have
is open and live. Please, you hit the raise hand button in the lower right corner. And I'd like to add mine. So I have been in several war situations and natural disaster situations where we were cut off from the internet for great lengths of time, and it was very, very frustrating because our world was through the internet and through those connections. And now with 5G coming, and we're able to break through the wired connections so we can stay in contact with the people, because I happen to live in a virtual world and an online world, which many of you do too. Our connections are all over the globe, not just people living next door. So Chris and Tom, what do you see happening with those kinds of geography breaking situations is coming with 5G and 6G and 85G?
Well, what's interesting about virtual worlds is that this is the first technology that's being developed simultaneously in every advanced country in the world. Then with 5G, that makes it more accessible, more possibilities. So it's going to be a huge surge. And one of the things that affects isolation most is crisis. In 2020, I know it's been a bummer, but crisis stimulates innovation, and we're going to go so much faster further. But the problem with social VR is going to be the same problem that social media has, is that even though we're the most connected society in human history, you're having the biggest growth in isolation. So we have to watch out that VR isn't isolating, that it is actually being able to have true human connection, social engagement, and we have to learn how to communicate with each other better because, well, we don't.
Well, isn't that true of the real world, not just
that's
VR?
Exactly.
Okay, I love
exactly.
it. Yeah.
The thing is that the algorithms that run Facebook are the different algorithms that will run the virtual worlds. And so that's where we have to watch out. It's not what we see, but what we don't see. And we have to be very cognizant of that. And we have to connect it in with the physical world too, and check in on everybody we know, and always constantly stay in connection.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it. All right, Keely, you're up.
Hello. Yeah, just a quick note on kind of an example. In my own life, I've been kind of isolated from social groups and conversations just because the way I sound. They're like, "Oh, you sound funny. You have an accent," and then yeah, I get isolated, and it's really sad.
Yeah, that's interesting. And most people don't realize that speech is the #1 prejudice in the world. I work with people with aphasia, and they speak differently, and they think that all these things are retarded. Their intelligence affected. They're and it's not. It's very important that we're cognizant of that and be able to be patient and understanding and really try to understand each other. And it's not your fault. It's our fault for not having that patience of inquiry and exchange.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Educators in VR and Alt Space because I haven't felt that way.
Wow, that's great. What a testimonial, Laurel.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I love it. All right, let's see who's up. Keely, brilliant. And Keely, I adore you. You are amazing. So I'm absolutely thrilled you are here as part of this. Okay. Nerd, you're on.
All right. Yeah.
Where's Nerd?
Right over here.
Okay, waving over there.
Okay, Nerd.
Yeah. Just real quick. Before I go into my question, I want to say, not the same as a social isolation, but being isolated from experiences. My father has ALS and is in late stage, so lost speech, movement, and I've been able to take over. I have an Oculus Quest. He used to be a skydiver, and finding videos about skydiving, taking him to Paris, which is one of his favorite cities. So already seeing what you can do to help people like that. I'm intrigued as somebody who works with these sorts of virtual spaces, what you see, if there's room there for basically therapeutic uses. I myself, I struggled with alcoholism for about 20 years and was able to get sober with the help of a rehab facility, and currently working on pursuing a career, actually finishing up a degree in counseling. And one of the things I'm intrigued by is using VR because I was able to get an experience at a facility that not everybody's going to be able to do, and being able to use social VR and get those groups and get that kind of community and environment for therapeutic use. And want to see what your thoughts are as far as that for mental health, addiction, things like that in VR.
Yeah, our core focus in space research is emotional, social, and psychological and mental health. And one of the really important things here is that there are things you can do before you lose your speech or before you lose your memory. I mean, there are ideas out there that you can start capturing your memories now. And so that when you start to lose your working memory, you can be able to refresh that, share that with people in different aspects. So there's a lot that's happening in therapeutic. The challenge here is that a lot of people look at VR for like exposure therapy or distraction therapy. Those are just two very simple versions of what we can do. There's a lot more where we can go. Isolation is inside the head. It's with emotions, it's with imaginations, it's with your soft feelings. And so the best thing that can happen is human connection. And really work directly with therapists, pathologists, to really understand what's the problem, how can we reach, because we can do a lot of things, but we're not the solution, we're just an answer to the solution that help them. So we're therapy.
So can I interrupt? I think that you need to exit and re-enter.
Just re-enter the room and clear up your audio. Yeah.
You have
But what he's yeah. So Tom, can you say a little bit about that from your own experiences about those, the voice and the connections and the sense of community in VR?
Well, yes. Well, let me go back to the question about therapy. I believe that what we want to have is an experience that sort of does it all. An experience that provides this connectivity, a heart-to-heart connectivity. Because, it's wonderful that VR actually doesn't, it takes the faces away, the real faces of people, but we are not then constricted by those faces. We now can look from heart to heart because we can get to love each other by how we interact. And and that's a powerful tool I think we can use. But what we found, for example, in using VR for pain, especially pain research, we've done a lot of things in pain. And we find that what we have as a tool is not only can provide therapy in terms of reduction in pain, but also we can diagnose. So it's a combination of diagnostics, therapeutics, and basically entertainment and connection all wrapped into one. And I think that's the power of what we have in this immersive computing domain. Yeah. So when we add to that some of the new technology for connectivity, especially mobile connectivity with 5G, then that just enhances the bandwidth, not only bandwidth between our servers, but the bandwidth to the brain, and then provides a new mobility that we didn't have otherwise. But we're actually getting a little ahead of ourselves here.
Yes, we are. You all just thought AltSpace was a game, didn't you? You didn't realize that actually, as a community, we're all studying and no. I love it. I love it. This is fascinating. All right, so let's hold down some of these questions back, and you guys keep going. So if you have a question, just hold on to it, and we'll come back to you.
We'll have plenty of time at the end to do that.
Yes,
on that
absolutely.
Note, Tom, one of the things that we found with cognitive rehabilitation is the power of mixed reality to stimulate or simulate experience. We also able to capture and analyze it. And so what we were working with is what we call a human experience modeler, and it really starts to look at behavior and to understand the cognition and in the brain that's happening inside. Because we work with people with aphasia who can't tell, or without working memory, they can't necessarily tell us what's wrong. So we have to learn from their behavior, and that's a really important measure point.
Yeah. You know, Chris, that's a good segue into our next segment, where we want to talk about the whole area of these mixed realities and VR, AR, so forth, and how could how could we propose solutions with these technologies for these problems of isolation and loneliness?
Absolutely. And one of the things here is that since loneliness and isolation is a psychological or emotional issue that's really a concern, we have to understand inside the head. And so one of the things that we really have developed is these 3 dimensions of extending reality. And it goes beyond what mixed reality is.
Chris,
and so,
could you turn on there? We're not being able to see you in room 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
What am I supposed to do?
Turn on air as well as megaphone. Make sure megaphone and on air are back
as a
on.
re-entry. All right. Reset.
Yeah, sorry. All right.
So the 3 dimensions of extending VR is that we start with reality. And we have 2 realities. One reality is our external reality and our internal reality. And that's really important because everything, the magic's behind our eyeballs. And that's where we have a real effect, whether in training or therapy or anything. But the external stimulus is what we can control and excite. And an external aspect is working with the virtuality continuum that we call mixed reality. So it goes from 100% reality to 100% virtual. And that's the mixed reality, virtuality continuum. But the next part that we really have to do is the next axis is what we call the imaginality continuum.
Chris,
yes.
Chris, I am so sorry to interrupt you because you're on such a beautiful thing. I need you to hit the on-air button under host tools. Turn it on. Okay, turn it off and turn it back on so that it's blue. Because people aren't seeing you in room 2. We got a whole lot of people who want to hear everything you're saying. All right. Now, if you're in another room, please hit the applause when Chris talks. Chris, talk.
Oh, and so our second axis.
Now they can all hear you. Beautiful.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
Our second axis of extending reality is what we call the imaginality. This is the magic behind the eyeballs, and it's also what we call fictional simulation. This happens when you read a novel and you imagine a whole world just by reading words, which is pretty amazing. That story is being produced in your imagination, not in front of you externally, and that is as important as the virtual and real external stimulus. And the third axis is what we call sociality. And this is what's really important that's starting to grow in social VR, but I can't wait till we get to more social XR. And this social aspect goes from 100% passive solo consumption to 100% social contribution and creativity and interaction. And this is what's really the most important to address isolation, is how we connect. And we need to start to use all this technology so we can capture the human experience and then also analyze it to start to see it. And so we're working on technology that can really start to read the escalation and de-escalation of social cohesion. And so in a sense, I don't work with isolation as much as I work with increasing social cohesion. And the more I can do that, the better I'm at. And what we do with that is we work with a concept called conversational story creation. This is a whole new story approach that uses ancient techniques and ideas. So you go usually to a movie theater, and it's a solo experience that you're passive and you're just absorbing. Well, that has one storyteller telling a story to all the other story listeners. What conversational story creation is that you take turns being storyteller and story listener. Instead of going into a story trance like the movies, you go into a social dance, like the social interaction. And these are the things that we're exploring in real, virtual, in telepresent worlds to kind of help, engage people and help them overcome communication obstacles, which kind of leads us
Chris,
to our next thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you have an example of that?
Yes, we
how
do.
this conversational storytelling works.
Yes, we do. And so this is really how I got into isolation is I was working in virtual worlds. I was building, learning landscapes for NASA. And our person who built all of our amazing sets, the physical reality, had a stroke and had serious aphasia. And who knows what aphasia is? Can you kind of clap if you know what aphasia is? Okay. Aphasia can happen to anybody, anytime, anywhere. And most people don't know what it is until they get it. And aphasia is a loss of language due to a stroke or head trauma. And what happens here is that you get trapped in your mind. You're a prisoner of your own mind, that you can't communicate. You have trouble reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And it's all this whole spectrum that we run into, but we start to talk about, speech as a prejudice. People think that they're affected their intelligence, but it's a loss of language, not intelligence, and particularly not of imagination. And the one thing that they lost is the ability to get lost in a novel. That's some of people's favorite thing. And without reading, it just becomes a wall of words. So the conversational story creation or a story trove is telling a story with a box of authored artifacts that is able to stimulate or paint with the imagination and tell a story beyond words. But we tell very little of the words. The less we do and the more they imagine, the better effect it is. And so what happens is that starts a whole conversation with 3 to 8 people, and that one story trove can last a whole hour or two, which is the length of a feature film. And what happens here is that we've heard people from aphasia in that experience basically say, oh my gosh, I forget I have aphasia. Or they say, we ask, what was that experience like? And they'll say, well, it's like reading a short story. And it's like they've lost that ability, and they've kind of found a new way through it. And so one of the things that they taught me is that their loss of language taught me that I'm dependent too much on language, and I'm the one who's disabled by not using that wide river of communication that's available to us.
But let's turn to the audience again and see if any of you can mention examples that you've had where the technology of our age, this immersive media technology, has had an impact for people who have been isolated.
Well, I have a friend of mine, Saved for Life, is here, and she has a question, and she and I both have traumatic brain injury. So I'm mine happened when I was very young, and so I've had a lifetime to cope and have skills with it, but part of that was finding language again and being able to communicate when things didn't make sense. And she also very proudly says that she does too. So I'm not telling any tales on it. So Saved for Life, you want to share?
I'm trying.
You're here. You're on. Go ahead, Save for Life. Oh, did you mute yourself again? Yeah. All right. Hold on a second. Yep. Okay, let's try it again. Here you go, hon.
Oh, okay. Am I
You're on. You're on.
All right. Now, what was the question?
Oh, no, that's okay. That's all right.
Wait a minute.
About the isolation through aphasia. So the aphasia issues that you're having with the traumatic brain injury?
Yeah, I just got kicked out or something.
No, that's okay. Come on over here.
I don't quite know how to get there.
Just teleport right here. There you go. Now just stand still. Stand still and talk to us. Beautiful.
I tried, but I keep getting kicked out.
That's okay. It's okay. Just talk to us.
I don't get it.
That's all right. Okay, so the aphasia that was associated with your traumatic brain injury and the isolation you felt since that happened.
It sucks. I don't know. I'm like totally lost right now. So
okay, all right. Which actually, so when you get back in your chair and you calm down, let me know, and you can get it.
Where's my chair?
Right there. Okay, there, beautiful. And so, But that's one of the examples, you know, the distraction of her being clicking the button. No, not a worry at all. But that's one of the struggles with people who with this. And I know myself, sometimes I'll get confused with too many buttons and too many things, and then I lose complete track of what's going on, because that ability to focus and hold on to the thought. It's kind of, I imagine it's much like people with ADHD who are chasing their thoughts, but we just kind of lose them and have short-term memory issues. Now, how can immersive tech and stuff, how can that really help us?
Well, one of the things that's real important is that as I get into aphasia and isolation, I realize I'm doing more for everybody who doesn't have aphasia and is not isolated, to really kind of help bring everyone together, because it's really a matter of teaching everyone to be able to work with overcoming any of these obstacles. So it's working together, because communication is two-way. And if you need to be able to know how to communicate, be patient, when to help, when not to help, and to be able to see obstacles to help reduce them. So we look at it in all different ways. So a lot of it is more of society helping to be more inclusive and find these obstacles so that they can reduce them. And that's one of the things I've been working on to do that. And I think that we shouldn't rely on all virtual or all real. We need to have a whole spectrum of real, virtual, imagine to adapt to whatever the user wants. And I think that that's really important. And we should probably get away from GUIs too.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Okay, well, all right, Teresa 91 has a question, and then we can get back to the conversation.
Have you ever been to a virtual support group?
Where are you, Teresa?
She's right over here.
Okay.
Okay. Did you hear me?
Teresa. Yes.
Yes. Have you ever been to a virtual support group?
I have not been to a virtual support group, but we've been looking at different opportunities to do talking circles in VR, which is a different form of circle. What is your experience with support groups in VR?
Well, I went to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting here on AltSpace, and from my experience, it really does feel like, you know, you're not just talking to emojis, you're talking to a real human being, you know. So I think, yeah, virtual reality is great for if you're isolated and you want to talk to other people who have similar issues, like Alcoholics Anonymous, or if you want to take a class. My second favorite social thing to do here on AltSpace is go to an English class, and the teacher he tries to remember the names of avatars, and he tries to keep track of who comes to class, and always acknowledges them as if they're a real person. So I think it's great.
Excellent.
Is that Michael McDonald?
I don't know his name, but I know I think his avatar is named Lotus.
Yes, that's Michael. It's one of our educators in VR project team members. He's beautiful. Yes, he's one of the dream teachers. Love it. Go ahead.
What's interesting that's happening here is that even with the limitations of VR, that makes our imagination works overdrive. So our imagination is really kind of reaching out. We want to believe so much that it actually is increasing your brain plasticity and really opening up new synapses so that you can look at like with language, rediscovering language, or finding, understanding, reimagining your own story and looking at your emotions differently. And so I think our imagination is actually doing most of that work. The VR is just stimulating that exercising of the imagination, which that increases, more therapeutic effects.
Right. Well, fantastic. Thank you for those contributions. Well, let's move on to sort of the last part of our arc, which is the call to action. So, Chris, based upon your experience.
Before that, I want to talk to another project we've been working on, which is interesting because in this times we have both isolation and certain unrest and protests and so forth. And one of the things that we're working on is applying story troves to help different people of different backgrounds to find a common ground in communicating. And these story troves is looking at history and re-examining history and understanding our history, flaws and all, and really coming to grips with the reality, because we've been only learning history or just part of history. We really need to learn from history. And this becomes a really interesting project, so we can learn from history from different points of view and really start to tap into lost stories and forgotten dreams of people who have not been included in history. And this is going to be a very exciting project. We're starting in Georgetown, South Carolina.
Fantastic, Chris. Thank you. So let's move on to the call to action. You know, if the world were perfect and you were king, you know, what would you want to relate to your wonderful subjects that you have out here in the kingdom to help make the world a better place?
Well, I think that the one aspect of the Virtual World Society we've been working on, Tom, is a thing that's when there are founding documents, we want to start developing regional affiliates. This is so that we can both kind of, you know, think globally, but act locally and get into communities. And the way we've been doing that is working what we call real world laboratories, is that we embed ourselves in the problem space. We work with subject matter experts that are helping the people in need, and we start to understand them, watch them, and listen and see how we can extend their abilities in the problem space, and then transition that, and we look at their problems and unpack their problems to find potential solutions or innovations. And then with that, those solutions start to become new ideas and innovations. But one of the things that is important in innovation is that innovation should be liberating, not disruptive. And we have a whole wrong idea about innovation, and particularly with different abilities. And one of the things I found is that people with disability have been the biggest innovators for me, an inspiration for innovation, because whatever they're dealt with, they're overcoming. They're making the effort to get across those obstacles, and they do almost anything. And that's great to learn from them, and they can teach us how we can kind of make creative leaps with this technology.
Well, in that same regard, Chris, in terms of the Virtual World Society, here we are, our mission is to lift humanity, and we want to unlock and link hearts, right?
Yeah.
How do you see our mission? How do we use our membership? How do we encourage our membership? How the members on their own can help with the Virtual World Society in this mission, especially in dealing with isolation and loneliness?
That's a great question. First of all, there are so many variations of isolation happening, so that we need every regional area to work on a different problem, part of isolation. And then with virtual reality developing in every advanced country in the world simultaneously, in these technology become available, we need to bring those to the community of need and really see how you can help them. And I think if we can support regional affiliates that can find leaders that are willing to kind of have that vision, you know, put in that work and wanting to find meaning in their life and directing it, I think that we need to really now be able to kind of get on the ground and be able to help different community centers in all these areas, particularly urban and rural, where a lot of isolation is happening. Isolation, suicides have increased 25% over the last 10 years in rural areas. It's a big issue that we don't see, and in that suicidality is a big thing that we need to catch and work with.
Well, Chris, what and Michi, the need for exercising the nextant. Why don't you explain that, and especially the nextant challenge?
Well, so we have the Nextant Prize, which is not an award, prize for people who have used their heart to see the future and make creative leaps, and read about all the Nextant recipients. They're very inspiring. So what we want to do now is to have a Nextant challenge that we can get all the innovators in the world working with the innovation technology and be able to focus on one challenge. In this particular, we picked isolation, and we want to find ways to kind of have different efforts to find these different opportunities, because I think that virtual reality faces a real danger. in the sense that it can isolate as much as it can liberate.
Mm-hmm.
And we really need to understand how it's working and finding good ideas that are happening with everybody to really kind of accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative.
Thank you. And of course, the society is no stronger than its members and the teams that form to do the work. We put work now. We can do a lot of talking, but in the end, we have to turn this into action. And your suggestions on how we can do that are important. So I think what we'd like to do now is, Laurel, we'd like to open this up for comments and questions to the whole audience of what you think about this and how you believe we can, as a community, solve this very difficult professional stage of a coronavirus, and it isn't going to go away. As Chris mentioned, several other areas where we have problems that have emerged in our society that have to do with isolation and loneliness.
And this question has just lit up the Q&A board. So make sure everybody get on there, get your questions, your comments in here, because this is clearly a hot topic.
Mm-hmm.
Steph, hi.
Well, you already covered what I was going to ask about, but I'm wondering that we're developing a new kind of culture, one that we are having to invent almost out of everything we've experienced before and bring it into this space as if this were the reality. It's a tall order. Where does a creative individual fit into that? Where does the individual's creativity get used in that kind of an environment?
Fantastic question, and it's multiple questions you asked. One is we should never give up reality for virtual reality, and we should never forget our imagination. Reality that separate them. And what we're doing in this emergent culture that's happening in the virtual and social VR and XR is really tapping into ancient traditions that humans have always had. And so in the last 100 years, technology has advanced so much with media and communication, but it's separated us and made us passive. It's devolved the human being. Now that we have immersive interactive worlds, we have to understand that our beings are using all senses, all dimensions, all directions, and all realities. And that increases our bandwidth for communication. And so what has the creative person to do? Everything. Artists are the tip of the spear of innovation. They think differently. They make creative leaps. They're bold and eager to go in and question the engineers
application to highlight this local community.
Fantastic.
And to put it in a museum, and we play it. So we had these people come in, Oculus Swift controllers with their fingers, because they were too young. I think they're like 5. Shredded it and upset with myself. I developed it, and then I was like, okay, I need to rethink this, and I made it so the grip button allows them to interact with the application.
Awesome.
And then they're able to play with it and have so much fun, and it made me cry. I fixed it, and I know it's a small. They're maybe more than excited and happy. I'd love to be one of those regional areas.
Right.
Whatever.
Wonderful. Because in really the most about the more the spatial augmented reality that is able to kind of embed the world with virtuality and hand gestures and making every surface a virtual surface. And without and so they're so bland. Everything looks is that the games are giving us the imagination. We need to exercise our imagination, and that is so fantastic. And that's a great story, and it'll be wonderful to have you involved with building community out there in affiliates.
Yes.
Yeah, it'd be awesome. Thanks.
Oh, right.
Well, we're not going to have to see. Well, first, and have a little straight to is reality, virtuality, and imaginality are going to be one world. It's going to, you can tap into whatever, and then the abilities, the technical. So that
Experience, for little Star Trek.
Well, holodeck is from the 70s, so we need to upgrade and update our analogies. So
okay, still relevant.
And also, it's trademarked.
Right. I know. Andrew, you're on. Andrew?
Huh?
Hi. You have a question for them?
Oh, no, I don't. I just came in here to see how.
Okay. Okay. Brian Collins, how about you?
Hey, how you doing, Chris?
Hi, Brian.
How you doing? So I have a question for you. Have you guys looked at different cultures and how different cultures handle isolation and that type of thing? Specifically, what I'm thinking about is like Eastern versus Western cultures, where Eastern tend to be a lot more reserved than us loud, boisterous Americans, and the Europeans out there who are more outgoing, I would say, just by nature of our culture. And how does that affect any of this?
Well, that's that's a very good question. I think that first of all, we can't jump to assumptions and conclusions about cultures. I think that I've worked in China for a long time, and I've always heard that they aren't creative and innovative, and they are some of the most creative and innovative people around. They just, maybe spend most of it working around the system rather than creating new technology. But the issue is that we have everyone. We're all humans, and we're just as creative and innovative, and we have the same problems also. The issue is that our cultures have for centuries formed us into these different boxes that need to melt away. And one of the things that we're studying with different history is that we have a large area, what I call intergenerational secondary trauma. And this is with all the peoples that have been oppressed in history, probably everybody but white men. But it's there, and it's been working off of stereotypes and assumptions, and one of the things about virtuality and it's getting around is that we're going to be getting around that. We're going to get over that. I was working in Japan in the early 90s, and that's when computers started coming aboard. So that what was amazing is that with computers and with virtual reality, I was able to, the boundaries I could jump over, and I can learn as much from the different cultures as possible. And what's going to be neat is we're going to start to learn and enjoy our differences, and understanding that we have a common human ability, but we have all these different varieties of worlds and traditions. And I think that there's no obstacle with our imagination and our social cohesion that can overcome those obstacles. And so I think those are going to melt away. I think that, people are comfortable with what their traditions are, but on the same token,
well, let me sort of add to this, if you don't mind.
Please.
I think that back to the question of, I think we need to preserve and celebrate diversity.
Yes.
And heritage.
Yeah.
And one of the things I would happen is that all of us become the same. I mean, it's back to what you were talking about before. All the stores become the same way.
Yeah.
And we have to. I mean, it's just like, what is the universal language? I mean, is that going to be English? Is it going to be Chinese, or what is it going to be? One of the things that was consulting for the premier of where was it? Burma, and apparently there was going to be a big trunk cable, internet cable, going through Burma, and from Russia, Siberia, over to Burma, and so forth. And the question that they were asking, well, why don't we tap into this? Why don't we tap into this cable, and then we'll be connected to the rest of the world, with this high bandwidth capability. And Howard said, why would you want to do that? And they said, well, so we're connected to the rest of the world. But he said, yes, but you have 60 languages in Burma. And if you now wanted to make everybody speak the same language, you begin to lose that. And each of those languages have their own spirit, that came from experience and things like that. So the real, to me, the challenge is, how do we keep both? How do we dissolve these, preserve uniqueness, because we don't become the same?
Well, what's interesting about
that is
when you talk about language is an invention of humanity. It's the most ancient disruptive technology there is. And we have to learn language in early childhood development. Otherwise, we lose the ability for abstract thought. And that language is forming our mind. So every language, every different language, and every different culture is forming a different mind. And once we start to look at that in our imagination, we're going to be much more versatile. And I think the future universal language is going to be telepathy.
Well, good point, because
language, we still should hold on to
it.
That was not the answer I was expecting to hear you say.
Well, I was going to say the
Okay, Chris.
mind meld, but
there you go. Yeah. So, Chris, what am I thinking right now? Yeah, I know it. Yeah. So, again, see all these Star Trek references: infinite diversity and infinite combinations. So I love it. Great question. Thank you, Brian. And Paul, you are up.
Yeah. Yeah. Georgetown chose me. I usually don't work with areas or people that don't want me to work with them. And so I was working with an amazing researcher called Margie Forbes, who worked in Carnegie Mellon, and her parents lived down in Georgetown. And so she retired there, and she said, there's this great rice museum, and it's really bringing together all these different cultures, particularly the Gullah community. And they said, your story would be fantastic there to start bringing these different cultures and histories together and be able to have them so that we can start discussing all these issues that are coming up now. We were talking about it before, but really kind of embrace all of our diverse culture and to learn from history that we haven't been learning from. And the Gullah community is probably the prime example. And there are so many stories there I can't begin to tell you, but we're going to be starting to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'll have to learn how to. Have to learn how to speak Gitchi. That would be. But I think that would be cultural appropriation. That would not be appropriate. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, on YouTube, there's a class for everything.
I have a lot of expectation there.
Yes. Andrew, and
yes. Like, what happens if we push virtual reality towards the next step of we are now?
So, what's the question? Is what is it going to be, or how we're going to do it, or what is it?
Like, how are we going to do it?
Together.
Well,
yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to step on you.
Groups.
Yes.
So the way I see it is that for every world that can take one problem, and that virtual reality is everywhere. And so each society, each regional area takes a problem and share their ideas and their work so that other people can duplicate it in the other communities. We're going to be so rapidly innovating in improving problems. But it really takes small groups. Margaret Mead said, never question a small group or something. I'm paraphrasing here. But, that's where change happens. And find some friends, bring it together and work together. Don't do it alone, but don't try to do too much, but really kind of take one step at a time and share it and inspire others. Did that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me add to Chris. I loved the comment he made about the artist or the tip of the spear. I think that's what you said. And I believe that one of the biggest improvements or advances we should make right now is be able to empower those artists and content builders. Yeah. And we still are developing VR content with CAD tools. Yeah. We're still basically using CAD. So we're doing this in 2 dimensions in order to create 3-dimensional worlds. And when we get into the real high bandwidth content generation tools that can be used by designers and artists, then I think we'll see this revolution in experiences. Right now, it takes too long to build these experiences, and they're sort of clunky because of the tools we have. So certainly, I put that high on the priority list for us to be able to build 3D within 3D, and to be able to use all of our multi-sensory capability in the process of doing that building. Would you agree with that, Chris?
Absolutely. I have a story from Randy Pausch, who I started a laboratory in a very technical engineering, left brain kind of culture. And I was an artist, and I wanted to kind of liberate their imagination. But it was so strange. And Randy Pausch was starting his laboratory at Carnegie Mellon, and he came down and gave a talk, and he says, what do you want me to talk about? And I thought, I don't know. I mean, I'm in this situation. I'm an artist with engineers. Can you help them understand me? And his whole lecture was about one thing. He says that the person who's most different in your group is the most important. And that's where every artist should join another group. And every group of engineers should recruit an artist and have at least one artist, a token artist, and have that differenceness. And that's what I call transdisciplinary research. And that's where I was able to work in a hospital in Munich with Nasir Nadab and really kind of work with surgeons and computer scientists, really pushing the envelope of innovation. Not because I knew about surgery or computer science, is because I saw different things, I thought different ways, and I inspired them to think differently.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Love it. All right. We have, Steph is back. Let me put you on air. You're on.
Thank you. Could you define for us what a region is, what a place is when members can be anywhere in the world at one time?
Yes. First of all, it starts with your imagination. And your consciousness is in between your ears. That is where place is. Then everything out from that is negotiable. And so it's what you want to be. And that's probably the number one cause of sim sickness, is that our imagination wants to believe so much and the technology hasn't caught up. And while our eyes are seeing one thing, our body's saying, oh, wait, no, whoa, you know, makes you throw up. And it's really the discontinuity of that really affects sim sickness the most. So we really have to really understand in that mind, in the technology and the environment, really understand what's happening so that we align those much better and give us more cues in all dimensions, all directions, all senses, and all realities together. And then you're where you want to be.
Let me add to that, Chris. Thank you. I think that the context of the question was about, we mentioned regions, people working in regions, problems. Is that a little more what you were talking about? And it's interesting now that we're coming here from all over the world. But what does that mean anymore? The regional boundaries. So back to what Chris was saying, it's sort of in your mind. But to me, we've talked about this a lot, and organizing the virtual world society into helping to grow these things, where these small groups. And really, we don't have, when we think about region, we can think about region in terms of the application of this. For example, when Chris mentioned the work that he's doing in South Carolina, and we want in the virtual world society, we are doing some work in Appalachia. And so you can define those as regions where the boots are on the ground, and we're really trying to do something with individuals, but using the technology to implement that. So there are regions of high need where we could say that where we want to work. But there are also topical regions. For example, if you are interested in working in this whole area of dementia, certainly that could be considered a topical region, where there's a gathering of people who are really interested in trying to solve this problem, how we could use technology to do that. So there's a coming together, and I think that educators in VR have done a good job of this, of organizing these groups who are addressing some of these pervasive problems. And as a partner with educators in VR, we want to do the same thing. So that's what we want to do. The problem is not defining a great geographical region as much as it's how to focus on areas where we can make a difference without being just wanting to accomplish the world. I have a problem with that, by the way, because I like to operate in swamp mode. Swamp mode is where you're 1 inch deep, spread out all over the place, as opposed to laser mode, where you're focusing on something where you can do some good. And I think you have to have both parts, because you want to take one area of discipline and move it to another. And so I guess you need to have both kinds of thinking in that. But I would like to propose that we think about those, and along with educators in VR, so that we can have birds of a feather working together in these domains.
I think that those are the two types of affiliates that we want to start to
Yes.
encourage: is the regional and the topical, and so that they can work together to really kind of share and inspire each other. And so it's not just isolated one physical reason or discipline, but the region does more transdisciplinary kind of collaboration, and then the topical does more global kind of cross-border interaction.
Right.
Beautiful. All right, and I love our project teams. Thank you, Steph. Anyone else have any other questions for these amazing pioneers in VR and immersive technologies? And I'd like to know, while we're waiting for any more questions before we turn it over, we have just a couple more minutes. We've already run over, but you guys are just like candy. It's just beautiful. We feel so thrilled that you're here. We just literally want to gobble you up and download your brains, So Chris, you've had all this experience, you're doing all this research. What's next for you professionally?
Next for me, I am working on basically being able to measure social cohesion, and so that we can understand and prevent isolation. And we're developing a new technology or paradigm that we call virtual social analogics. And this is using perceptual computing and subject matter expertise in building huge databases that researchers around the world can help participate and really start to understand, what this is about social cohesion and how we can enhance it in all aspects of our lives. Does that answer your question?
Ooh, yes, that's beautiful. Well, look at the audience. They're in favor. Look at that. That's amazing. All right. We have a question from Angela again. Hi, Angela. Angela? Whoop, must have leaned in. Okay. Anyone else have any questions before we open up the floor? Y'all can visit, and I think Mark is going to refresh the space to make sure that the people are kind of coming together and all into one room here. And any other questions? Let's see. Oops, we got another question there. Angela, are you still there? Yes.
Okay,
Hi,
can
Angela.
you hear me?
There you go. Yes, now we can. No problems.
Thank you so much for your talk. I have a quick question. As an entrepreneur, I'm sitting here wondering, what can I do to help or contribute to what you're after?
Oh, fantastic question. We just have to have a conversation.
Okay.
So what do you do, and what's your gift?
Let's see. I currently invest in real estate and have a brick and mortar business, but I just, because of COVID and because my daughter bought me this Oculus that I didn't have time for about a year, and it sat in the box. So so now that I'm in here and I'm looking around and I'm hearing people like you, I just wonder how I like what you're saying, and I just wonder how I can, help or contribute in some way.
Well, join the Virtual World Society.
Okay.
That's one thing. And let me mention that that one of the things we're trying to do in the society is do exactly sort of a little bit of a matchmaking, like eHarmony of VR kind of thing. What we want to do is try to bring folks together who want to work on together on various projects, and especially how we can get to the community of creative artists and designers, along with the engineers and coders, together focus on a particular area that they're passionate about. And so you will see emerging from the society this community group we call We Make Reality. And this is for people who are really keen to work on applications that solve problems, pervasive problems, together, and to provide a storefront for those accomplishments, for those applications that they build. And it's sort of, I mean, this is extrapolating, I know, and probably my board would sort of thrash me for saying this, but what I ultimately see here is that we have basically this National Geographic Society. That's what VR does, where the National Geographic Society really sort of takes the outside in. Well, what we're trying to do is take the inside out and grow to something like the National Geographic, but where we have lots of projects going on, but we also are trying to do some specific things and have some some specific contributions we can make in the form of content and worlds that people can build. So I would like to have an equivalent to a Steam store for humanity, to lift humanity, so that these applications are out there for education and for medicine and for training and for all these apple pie motherhood good things that we want to have accomplished. So we represent that. If you go to the Steam now and you look for these applications, they're pretty much trashed because people say, that's not fun. You're not killing enough people in those apps. And so what we want to have is another place where these good things can come out. And not only can they come out, it's a form of support. Ultimately, if we have 10 million families who are willing to provide $100 a year to subscribe to the content, the good content that we're able to generate, you take 10 million families times 100 and you have $1 billion. And that's $1 billion for good and promoting this whole community of you and us to work on these specific problems.
Can I ask Angela a question? Are you a parent by any chance?
Am I a parent?
Yeah.
Of 5.
Awesome. That's where you can start.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is very important is the parent is the most important teacher in your lifetime. And the issue is, where does parents learn to teach? Not like a school teacher, but like a parent teacher. And the difference is the school teacher teaches a child, the parent teacher learns the child. And the thing is that right now, we are going to bring up an entire generation of what I call virtual natives. Okay, so we're all virtual immigrants right now. And we need to recruit parents to be able to engage with VR with their family and their children so that we can build this virtual native in the best way possible. I think that the digital immigrant didn't do the digital native justice because they left them off on their own. They kept the VCR blinking 12, if you know that reference. But the issue is we are such an important part. I'm working with a group of families in Maryland in bringing some parents together during this COVID-19 just because they're desperate looking for help as parents with their kids at home learning. And so one of the concept we're working on is this whole virtual learning living room. So with the parent as the most important teacher in your lifetime, with VR being the most important, powerful educational tool in history, and with the living room being available for a lifetime, this is probably the most central, important place where innovation is going to start. And it's going to start very young. And it's in your living room with the parent and child and family and mentor. So that's where you can start.
You.
What are the ages of your children?
Well, the youngest is 27. We're a family of engineers, basically, except for me.
Ah.
I'm the artsy business major.
Oh, all right, cool.
That's right.
You can do a lot. And the thing is that what you can do, because you have VR equipment, you can find other families that aren't as fortunate and being able to kind of give them a leg up and help them and cooperate with them. Because you can reach out to other families. I mean, that is going to be the part of the most important thing that's going to happen in the next generation is helping other parents bring up this virtual native.
And we want to provide accessibility. We want the ability to level the playing field, and so that as we go out into the world, so that everyone has a chance where they normally would not have access to the technology or access to the internet or bandwidth. That's really I think the single biggest thing that we can do for the world right now is provide that connectivity that comes from access And because we see that everywhere when people are given that or have that available to them, how it enriches everybody's lives and the whole community's changed as a result of that.
All right. Thanks, Angela. Wow, you stirred that up. And now it's Daniel's turn.
Yeah, lovely. I've been listening to all of this, fascinating. One thing particularly caught my ear, Tom. You said you'd like to be the app store for lifting humanity. That is a beautiful image. That's going to stay with me. I think that right there is really powerful because it's something that can be a one-stop shop for people. I think a little bit like we experience with educators in VR. People arrive in VR, maybe new, and something about education speaks to them. And if they had a similar kind of shining light immediately, oh hey, VR for good, it speaks to me, and like a moth to the lamp, you go there, and that's the one-stop shop. I think that's fantastic. Love to help you build that.
Wonderful. Let's do it.
That's how it works.
Yeah, I mean, the educators in VR and the Virtual World Society together, and we have this mutual admiration society and are enjoying this journey together.
I wanted to also mention something else to Chris. You were talking about the virtual natives. That's an interesting concept. I remember when I first got into VR, I was doing it because my son called me a digital dinosaur. Would you believe it? I was trying really with him, so I bought my first VR headset. And last year I came up with a similar concept, and that is the spatial curriculum and spatial natives. I realized very quickly, kids of my son's age who are growing up with Minecraft, they are learning spatially. Like they're ready for spatial. It's the educators need to catch up to meet.
Are humans, and humans are 3D. We're all in 3 dimensions, showing us through a keyhole in 2 dimensions and 2 senses. Right. And we have 5 senses. We have all directions, all dimensions, all realities. And if we start using them, because that will increase our bandwidth 3 times for working memory. I mean, this is our research I'm talking about. This is we are dumbing everything down. Why are we making technologies be like humans and forcing humans to act like machines? It's the wrong direction. And
well, yeah. The idea of the spatial natives then gave rise to the spatial curriculum, which is a project I'm working on with 1 or 2 people. And the idea is that we've had a digital curriculum. Everybody recognizes the need for a digital curriculum, but with this new revolutions, what we call it in computing, spatial revolution, spatial computing, I think we need a spatial curriculum that should really integrate throughout education, and also will be required in jobs and careers.
You have it, because before digital is actually special anyway. And you look at experiential learning theory, going back to John Dewey, you see hundreds of years of experiential learning that's happening. We developed stuff with UCF called Interplay, which is a like story game play to
Chris,
advance.
it's a real shame. I'm not hearing you so well.
Yeah, Chris, we're going to have to ask you to basically drop out and come back in again, like you did before.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, so the event has technically been over for 20 minutes, and so he needs to have a link to, well, as a presenter, he should be able to get back in. But if he's just re-entering, he should be fine. But we have a couple more questions as well. And then I'd like to unmute and allow those, at least that are in the room 1, to come in. If you have a friend, so those of you who are in the second room, and it's hard to know, but Mark is in there. And Mark, can you kind of move into the center and show people where you are? And to indicate that you are in the second room. And the people who are in the second room, if you have a friend in the first room, you should